Thank you for being a part of Apart But Together, expanding our community. My name is Heather Giles, and I'm a high school Spanish teacher from Rock Hill, South Carolina. I'm proud to be representing SCOLT, the Southern Conference on Language Teaching, and sharing with you 24/7 proficiency tips and templates to save time and your sanity. Teaching for language proficiency hinges on preparing learners to use their language skills in the real world with native speakers. This is a complex and messy undertaking, as we well know, because learners have varied backgrounds and wide ranging goals and purposes for using their language skills. So, as teachers, we have to consider not only where a student is now, but also where they've been and where they're going. Whether you're early in your career or a grizzled veteran, teaching for proficiency is labor intensive. Most textbooks don't have what students need, so we spend a lot of time researching, creating, and interacting with students to find just the right materials and the right approaches. This session focuses on tips and templates that I've found to be helpful time savers. I've grouped them under four guiding principles, which are 1. Curate content effectively, 2. Design meaningful instruction, 3. Streamline routine tasks, and 4. Keep it real. For each of these principles, it's helpful to apply perspectives from outside of the education field. For curating content effectively, it makes sense to think like a museum curator. Curators strategically to combine artifacts and research into a narrative. This narrative is the foundation of an experience for the museum visitor. So when we're thinking about our classrooms and our materials, we think about what kind of experience do we want our students to have? What kinds of things do we want them to interact with? And how do we catalog our resources so that they're accessible both for students and for us? In curating my own material for my classes, anything that is used by native speakers is fair game. I often have heritage speakers in my classes, so I often ask them to share favorite songs, memes, movies, or videos. This helps the heritage speakers build their research skills and comprehension skills. It also helps me have relevant content that the students are interested in, and it connects non-heritage learners with a Spanish-speaking community where they can share things and find that in many cases they have common interests, or the materials in Spanish are not all that different from what they're looking at in English. Another aspect of curating content is organizing it in such a way that it's easy to access and understand. This picture is a poster that's in my classroom that is next to the door and has phrases for students that students might use when they're leaving the classroom. So the key here is putting support materials where and when students are likely to use them. Um, this poster helps students stay in the target language because if they forget what to say to leave class, it's right there and it's right by the door. So I can hold them to that piece of target language, no questions asked, and it gives them a lot of confidence, so that if they get stuck, they have something to lean on for some support. For printed or web-based content, I found that using tables, graphs, and lists allows students to access information more efficiently than wading through paragraphs of instruction. And this was particularly crucial through remote learning. Um, my school is one-to-one, and so we had online instruction, and the students said that it was a lot easier to follow instructions if they had a table that had boxes for each day. It's just a little bit easier to digest. For the next principle of designing meaningful instruction, I try to think like a traffic planner. Each learner has their own vehicle of experiences, processes, and goals for language learning. Focusing on proficiency allows teachers to customize instruction rather than expecting all learners to take the same path at the same speed to reach the same destination. So all of these roads going in different places, the speeds may be different. When you're focusing on proficiency rather than one piece of set content, it gives you some flexibility. You can give different tasks, different materials, because you're still focusing on moving students forward. Here's the first template of the presentation. There will be an expanded version of this at the end in a file that's shared, but this just shows a kind of a loose shopping and planning list for a daily integrated performance assessment. So it starts with an authentic text or resource. It could be pictures, it could be a video clip, it could be an infographic, any kind of input that native speakers would also use. Um, I try to identify some element of interculturality where students are either researching information or where they're interacting in a way that is similar to what native speakers would do. And then there's an interpretive comprehension task, an interpersonal conversation or interaction task, and a presentational task where students either speak or write. They have a chance to prepare and polish their work. Authentic resources are probably the most important part of this because um, if if a resource doesn't help build cultural connections and context, then you probably need to find something else. There's a lot of culture that you don't really notice that is in authentic resources, and so having those happen each day or at least every other day, you don't have to build up to one big cultural experience. They're getting cultural tidbits all the time. Planning this way aids in balancing input, interaction, and production and keeping class moving, so there's a change of pace all the time. It also helps me focus on resources and tasks that support daily can-do statements rather than just going from activity to activity to activity. And as I mentioned, using authentic resources provides an opportunity to highlight cultural elements, both big and small. Especially when teaching novice learners, I include visuals to support language and to encourage students to focus on using what they already know. The bulletin board shown on here on the top is used to give students feedback and to support them in monitoring what they can do. It has descriptors, distilled descriptors adapted from ACTFL proficiency standards for novice, intermediate, and advanced. Um, We talk about leveling up by completing tasks using more sophisticated language, complete sentences, more description, asking questions, adapting questions, things like that. Or we also talk about scaling down by using simplified language for a task that might be more difficult. The key here is to make tasks manageable for every student. And the fact that this is displayed in my classroom, um, the students, they see it all the time. We refer to it, and whenever they carry out a task and I'm giving feedback, often we'll go over to this bulletin board and I'll say, here's where you are, or I'll ask them, where do you think you are on this? So they're focusing on the criteria for where they are, and it's pretty easy for them to say, oh, okay, here's where I am now, here's where I need to go, here's what I need to work on. Um, One of the strategies that I use is think in pictures, including visual supports and cues. And so at the top, there are um, examples of artwork that represent novice, intermediate, and advanced. The artwork from this bulletin board will also be in the file at the end of the presentation. But having the pictures, it helps them have an idea of what kind of language they're using, that sometimes keeping it very simple, like a stick figure, is okay. You can get your point across, but then other times, as you build skills, you can give more description and more explanation. The other um, template that's here, the plus delta, is a tool for reflection. I use plus delta to quickly share feedback. This can be a verbal debrief after an activity or an exit slip. Delta is normally about what you would change, borrowing from scientific context, but I've borrowed Bethany Drew's phrasing here of what would make it even better next time. And the reason I use that is because I think it fosters a growth mindset. It makes students think about, okay, this was just one snapshot of what I did. What can I do to do even better next time? And usually I use feedback, or I give feedback in English with novice students because they need to understand exactly what's being said. And so giving feedback on their performance, to me, that's constructive use of our 10 to 20% non-target language time that we're aiming for. For the third principle of streamlining routine tasks, I think like a dance instructor. It's all about teaching learners how to do basic steps and then put them together in different ways so that they fit the music. Distilling things down to essential steps also makes it easier to identify where learners may be struggling and to provide support or remediation. So, thinking about the communication that we're teaching our students, what steps do they need? What are the steps that are most adaptable? And once they master one step, what's the next step? Also, what do they need to know to perform solo, with a partner, or in a group, using communication for different purposes and in different sizes of groups? So, teaching students how to adapt is critical here. This infographic about food waste is an example of something that I might use with novice students, um, although in the target language, of course. My rule of thumb for authentic sources, for authentic resources, is to find a way to use it at least three different ways. If I can't use it three ways, I don't use it. So looking at this infographic, students could read through it to understand issues related to food waste. They could also look for key vocabulary related to talking about food waste. Then they could, with a partner or as prepared speaking, presentational speaking, they could identify what schools should or should not do to reduce food waste. They can also use it to recognize typical lunch foods in the US and discuss food and food waste at their own school. This could also be something compared with another infographic to see what information is in common, what information is different. In addition to using resources at least three different ways, I also try to teach activities that can be repeated and use them at least three times. So it might be in one unit a format for an interpersonal conversation, and then 3 weeks later we use that same format, that same model. It cuts down on how much you have to give instructions, and it also allows students to focus on the language and the production rather than understanding what to do. The templates here are some of my favorites. I use these a lot. Teaching patterns for tasks allows me to spend less time giving instructions and explaining and more time giving feedback during the process. Using templates like this guides students in better managing their learning process and allows them to transfer skills to different types of texts and different type of material. So the first example that you see is a listening task template where students are expected to listen to an audio clip three times. The first time they listen for familiar words and to identify the topic or the gist. They might have a checklist where they check off the words that they hear. The second time they listen, they put numbers to sequence ideas or make predictions to fill in gaps for what they didn't understand. And the third time they listen, they ask themselves focus questions and listen for specific information. Or I might also show a focus question so they can listen for that specific information. So they listen to it three times, but they're looking for three different things as they're looking for different information as they're listening, and they develop a more complete understanding. The template for I see, I think, I wonder is a thinking routine from the Harvard University Project Zero. The picture at the side, the learners would look at a photo or other visual and first describe what they see. So this one, I see two lines of children. Um, Boys are on one side, girls are on the other. The next step, when they tell what they think, they interpret or try to identify the significance of what they see. So I think this is for a school because maybe the boys and girls sit on different sides of the classroom or they're in different classrooms. So they have to do some interpreting beyond what they see. And the last part, I wonder, they posit questions, and those can be springboards for further research. This thinking routine gives students a way to systematically analyze material, and and I use this with my students who are in the International Baccalaureate program when they have to do individual orals and talk about a picture and identify cultural elements. We start off in the early levels by using I see, I think, I wonder. And so they're used to that pattern. They're used to tackling a picture and analyzing it um, from that approach. The last part of this is a keyword summary. So taking the same picture, I would ask students to identify 5 important words from the picture or whatever concept they're trying to describe. So this, for this one, it could be boys, girls, backpacks, building, outside, standing. So they would brainstorm the words and then they have to build 1, maybe 2 sentences to describe what's happening using those words. So a sentence could be the boys and girls are standing separately outside, or outside of the school, the boys and girls are standing and waiting. So there are a lot of different options, and I think this reinforces the fact that there's more than one way to express an idea, and as long as you find a correct answer, you're fine. The correct answer is not quite as important as a correct answer. Rounding out my tips for streamlining are things that allow me to be a facilitator in class rather than the sage on the stage giving instruction. I share proficiency rubrics with students that are used for all assessments throughout the semester, and we use them for conferencing. So they see the same rubrics, same criteria all semester long, and it gives them a fixed target to aim at and to track their progress. Students can rate themselves and each other without me having to tell them how they did, or they can rate themselves and then come conference with me and say, here's what I think, here's how I think I did, and we compare and see if we agree. Sometimes they rate themselves harder than I do. Rubrics also provide a path to improvement. Students can see, here's my score, here are my next steps, here's what I need to work on. And sometimes they use that to ask for help or to come in for extra tutoring to get them to the skills that they need. Using stations allows students to move and interact without me controlling every step of the instructional process. This was because stations are an important part of my regular instruction. Remote learning was a challenge, but I kind of adapted it for my online classes by having the elements that here's a vocabulary task, here's an interaction task, coming back to that IPA, to that daily IPA model, that there are different steps and different stations, and students could choose on a given day what they wanted to complete as long as they completed each type of task by the end of the week. An element that helped or that helps with stations and group tasks is having student experts who can explain concepts or demonstrate processes like uploading an assignment or taking a screenshot. Having peers help with technology questions and other issues that I know they're probably more proficient than I am. It allows me to focus on answering language questions, and it also builds more community because the students have a reason to talk to each other and to help each other. So one of the things that I found with technology is if you limit yourself to no more than 8 technology tools, including your learning management system. And while that sounds like it's not very much, if students learn to leverage those 8 tools really well, they can focus more on the language and on the production and communication than having to wade through technology issues. And I think we all saw during remote learning that technology issues can um, make kids just get really discouraged and lose heart. So I included this visual because I think it's valuable to examine how tech tools are used in our classes. There are many popular tools for vocabulary, but if you find yourself using 4 or 5 different vocabulary tools and only 1 or 2 tools for students to create and express themselves, it could be an indication that expression is taking a back seat. I've reflected on this in my own practice and found that, yeah, it's easy to design vocabulary activities, um, but I've learned to scale back on those tasks and provide students with more time and more opportunity to communicate and create and share. So I think this is a really good reminder to remind us all to choose tools that help students do all 4 of these tasks: to engage with the content, communicate with others, learn new information, and create. And finally, this brings us to keeping it real. When you think about keeping it real in your classes, think like a sculptor. Embrace the realities of your situation and your students. And we all had to do this with teaching remotely. You may not be starting from a perfect piece of stone, but the imperfections add character and force you to be creative in how you work with and around them. And I think having getting to know your students as individuals and finding out what their interests and traits are, it helps me make better instructional decisions and also deliver more of what they need and make things relevant. It also prompts me to learn new skills and learn about new tools and techniques so that I can get them where they need to be and meet their needs. So remember, as I said before, language proficiency is messy. That's also what makes things memorable and meaningful. By letting students vet or rank materials and activities, they're more invested in what they're learning about. They'll learn more when they have voice and choice with the content. For any materials that I use with my students in class, often I'll have them read something or listen to something, and that um, resource becomes a model for them to do their own posts, so their own blog post or their own social media or their own collage to share about something related to their life. We've all probably spent time looking for someone describing their daily routine and come up with few authentic options. And a couple of years ago, I stopped to think about this. Why is it so hard to find this? Well, I realized that people don't talk about their daily routine in day life, in real life. Nobody comes up and says, "Hey, well, normally I get up at 7 o'clock, but um, then I go take a shower and eat breakfast." We don't do that. People are more likely to write about their daily routine as a personal agenda, so a written text, or to tell about an experience where a day didn't go as planned. So, looking for examples of native speakers using um, real language for real purposes, it gives valuable cues for things that we can do to teach our students. It's also important to um, show students examples and to teach them formats of how to write an email in the target language, how to write a product review, photo captions, things like that. These are things that they're likely to interact with in the real world after they leave our classrooms. You can access the templates referenced in the presentation and a couple of additional templates as well through this Google Drive folder. The documents will prompt you to add a copy to your drive, but once you add a copy, you're welcome to edit and adapt however you need to. I hope you found some helpful tips that will streamline your process and help save you a little bit of time and energy. And whether we are face-to-face in person or virtual, I would like to invite you on behalf of the Southern Conference on Language Teaching to join us for SCOLT 2021, Language Through an Unfiltered Lens, coming in March of 2021 in Atlanta, Georgia. Muchas gracias. I wish you all the best for the coming year.